The stagecoach groaned as it rattled across the rutted Wyoming road, each jolt shaking Annie Whitmore straight to her bones. She tightened her arm around Tommy, her 6-year-old son, who slept restlessly against her shoulder. Dust coated his dark hair and settled into the folds of her faded dress. She brushed it gently away, fighting the sting rising in her eyes. Boston was now only a memory behind them. Cold winters, factory smoke, the small tenement room where she'd prayed each night for a way out. 3 months ago, she'd still been a seamstress, stitching until her fingers bled. Now she was riding toward a stranger who expected a wife. But not a child. Annie swallowed hard and pressed her free hand to the worn letter hidden in her pocket. Colt Mallister's handwriting was crude but steady, his words simple and honest. I need a wife to help with the ranch. I offer a solid home and good treatment. She had memorized those words. What she had not written back was the truth about Tommy. Every time she tried, fear stopped her. What man wanted to take on another man's child? What man would welcome the burden of a boy who reminded her daily of everything she'd suffered? "Mama," Tommy's sleepy voice pulled her back. "Are we close?" "Almost, sweetheart," she murmured, kissing his hair. "You think you'll have horses?" Annie forced a smile. Ranchers always do. The traveling preacher sitting across from her gave a warm nod. "Wyoming Territory is a good place for new beginnings, ma'am. The Lord favors the brave." Annie didn't feel brave. She felt like a woman running from a life that had nearly broken her. Running from the memory of Frank, his whiskey breath, his raised fists, the night she finally fled with Tommy, before those fists came for her child. Outside the window, the land grew wilder. Endless rust-colored earth, jagged rocks, and a horizon that felt too big for a woman like her. The sky stretched on forever, thin and sharp as a blade. Then the driver called out, "Bitter Creek Station ahead!" Annie's stomach twisted. This was it. The stagecoach rolled to a halt beside a small, dusty station. Men lounged against the building, their rough eyes following her as she stepped down with Tommy clinging to her skirts. She felt exposed, small, completely out of place. Then a quiet voice behind her said her name. "Mrs. Whitmore?" She turned and froze. Colt Mallister was a giant of a man, easily a head taller than the others. Broad shoulders, a deep brown beard, a pale scar carved through his left eyebrow. His clothes were worn but clean, and his eyes, gray like winter skies, watched her with a stillness that made her heart lurch. "Mr. Mallister," she whispered. His attention shifted to Tommy. Annie saw the flicker, surprise, confusion, maybe disappointment. Her breath caught. This was the moment she had dreaded. "I must apologize," Annie said, gathering every scrap of courage she had. "I should have told you in my letters. This is my son, Tommy. I am a widow, and I wasn't alone in my marriage." The words trembled out. She braced for anger, rejection, Colt turning away and putting her right back on that stage. Instead, Colt knelt, slowly, deliberately, until he was eye level with Tommy. "How old are you, son?" Tommy swallowed. "6, sir." "6 is a good age." Colt's voice was steady, low. "Old enough to learn to ride." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Colt stood again and looked at Annie, not with anger, but something softer, quieter. "If the boy is part of you," he said, "then he's part of me now." Annie's breath left her in a shaky rush. She had prepared for everything. Rejection, scolding, humiliation, but not kindness. Never kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Colt nodded once. "Let's get you home before dark." He loaded their small trunk onto a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. When he lifted Tommy into the seat with one powerful arm, the boy's eyes shone with excitement. Annie mounted the mare Colt had brought for her Rosie and followed the wagon as it rolled into the vast Wyoming wilderness. The land around them shifted from rough flat ground to rolling hills, the sky stretching wider with every mile. Tommy peppered Colt with questions about horses, mountains, and ranch work. Colt answered patiently, his deep voice steady and calm. Annie watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of fear and hope she didn't dare name. When the sun dipped behind the mountains, they crested a ridge. Below them lay a valley dotted with cottonwood trees, and a creek winding like silver through the land. Buildings stood tucked against a bluff, a barn, corral, bunkhouse, and a sturdy 2-story log home. Colt lifted a hand. Barren Ridge Ranch. "Home," his voice said, though he didn't speak the word. Annie felt something inside her loosen. For the first time in years, she imagined a life not ruled by fear. But as they descended toward the ranch, a line of riders appeared on a far ridge, just silhouettes against the fading light. Watching. Waiting. Colt saw them, too. His jaw tightened. His hand drifted near the rifle resting by the wagon seat. Annie felt a chill. This land was beautiful, but it wasn't safe. And whatever shadows lived here, she and Tommy were now part of them. Annie woke her first morning at Barren Ridge to the unfamiliar quiet of the Wyoming plains. No street vendors, no factory whistles, no neighbors shouting through thin walls. Only wind in the cottonwoods and the soft nickering of horses. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe it in, peace. Then Tommy barreled into her room, hair wild, boots mismatched, nearly vibrating with excitement. "Colt says I can help feed the chickens?" Annie half laughed, half gasped. "Chickens? You barely know how to tie your shoes, quote." Tommy grinned. "Samuel's teaching me." Samuel, the elderly ranch hand, had already taken Tommy under his wing, letting the boy trail him like a loyal puppy. Annie dressed quickly and followed them outside, relieved and grateful that Tommy seemed so at ease. But she still felt like a stranger in someone else's life. The stove smoked, the pump handle fought her, and one particularly angry red hen tried to peck her hand off. By mid-afternoon, Annie was close to tears, staring at a pot of half-burned beans. Colt appeared in the doorway, silent as a shadow. "Stove giving you trouble?" he asked gently. "It hates me," Annie muttered. Colt stepped in, sleeves rolled up, scar catching the light. He showed her how to adjust the airflow, how to bank the coals just right, his large hands deft and careful. "Takes time," he said simply. "You'll get it." With Colt near, the kitchen felt less intimidating. Annie found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. His quiet way of moving, how he made himself smaller despite his size, how he softened when Tommy ran up with a story. He was nothing like Frank. Just as that thought settled, the front door opened without warning. One of the town women, Constance Pratt, stood in the entryway, stiff as a post, eyes sweeping over the house with judgment so sharp Annie thought she felt it in her skin. "My husband wanted me to deliver these supplies," Constance said, placing a parcel on the table, "since you didn't seem to know what a ranch wife requires." Annie reddened. Constance's gaze dropped to Tommy, boots muddy, face smudged with dust, smiling up at her like she was a new adventure. Her lip curled. "Colt didn't mention a child in his advertisements." Annie stiffened. "My son is not up for discussion." Constance's eyes sharpened with cruel interest. "People talk, Mrs. Whitmore, about Colt, about the incident 5 years ago. You must have heard." Annie glanced at Colt, but he had gone still, expression a mask of stone. Constance leaned forward. "He nearly beat a man to death, you know. Violent temper runs in some men's blood." "Enough." Colt's voice was quiet but final. Constance blanched, muttered something about supper waiting, and left. Silence pressed the room flat. Annie finally spoke. "Is it true?" Colt exhaled, rubbing a hand across his scar. "Yes and no. It's not a story for Tommy's ears." Tommy, thankfully, was already outside with Samuel. Colt gestured toward the door. "Walk with me." They followed a path along the creek, water glinting gold in the late sun. Colt's voice was low when he began. 5 years ago, my sister Margaret worked at the Dalton Ranch. She was 17, sweet, too trusting. Annie's heart tightened. Robert Dalton took advantage of that trust, hurt her, more than once. Annie swallowed hard. She knew what men like that were capable of. When she finally told me, I confronted him, at the saloon, in front of half the town. Colt's jaw clenched. I beat him bloody. If they hadn't pulled me off him, I might have killed him. You were protecting her, Annie said softly. Maybe, but the law didn't care. Robert was a Dalton. I was nobody. They charged me with assault, gave me 2 years in prison. Annie's breath hitched. And Margaret? She asked, already fearing the answer. Colt's eyes darkened. She died while I was locked up. They said pneumonia, but she faded long before that. A long silence stretched between them. I built this ranch for her, Colt said. Every log, every fence, her grave's up on the ridge. I swore no one would push me off this land. Annie's chest ached with a mix of sorrow and fierce admiration. You're a good man, Colt Mallister, she whispered. He shook his head, looking away. I've got my share of darkness. So do I, Annie said quietly. But darkness doesn't make us monsters. It makes us human. When Colt finally looked at her, it was with something raw in his eyes. Hope, fear, longing, all tangled together. Before either could speak, hoofbeats thundered nearby. Samuel burst into view, breathless. Colt, riders on the North Ridge, Baxter's men again, watching. Colt's calm evaporated into steel. I told you, he muttered. They're testing boundaries. Why? Annie asked. Samuel answered for him. Because Judd Baxter wants this land, Miss Annie. And he ain't a man who takes no kindly. A cold wind swept through the valley then, chilling Annie to her bones. Trouble was coming. Colt knew it. Samuel knew it. And as Annie looked toward the distant ridge, where dark silhouettes lingered like wolves waiting for nightfall, she knew it too. Barren Ridge Ranch was beautiful. But beauty meant nothing in a land where greed ruled. And Baxter was a man who'd destroy anything, including them, to get what he wanted. The trouble Annie feared arrived before dawn. Smoke. Thick, black, choking smoke. Annie bolted upright in bed just as Colt burst into the room, pulling on his boots. Stay with Tommy, he ordered, voice sharp as he grabbed his rifle. But Annie shoved past him, heart pounding. Colt, what's burning? His answer was grim. The hay barn. Outside, flames clawed toward the sky, lighting the darkness like a fiery beacon. Horses screamed from the corral. The heat was fierce, blistering. Samuel was already there, throwing buckets of water that hissed uselessly against the inferno. Somebody did this, Colt growled. It wasn't a guess. It was certainty. Annie grabbed Tommy, rushing him toward the well where the smoke wouldn't choke him. Stay here, she said, voice shaking. Don't move from this spot. Tommy nodded, terrified but brave. Annie didn't stay with him. She ran straight back to Colt. Together with Samuel, they freed the panicked horses and led them away from the flames. Colt moved with fearless urgency, throwing open stall doors, guiding terrified animals through walls of smoke. Annie helped pull one stubborn mare from danger, its flank trembling with fear. The fire roared hotter, sparks leaping into the sky. By sunrise, the barn had collapsed into smoldering rubble. The message was clear. This wasn't an accident. This was war. Inside the house, Colt sat at the table, head bowed over his ash-covered hands. Annie stood beside him, shaken but steady. We can rebuild, she whispered. Colt shook his head. Not in time. Winter's coming fast. We needed that hay. Samuel came in, breathless, hat in his hands. Tracks all around the barn, Colt. Fresh ones. They came in the night. Baxter, Colt said. The name scraped like broken glass. It's him. He wants to break us so we'll sell. Annie felt anger flare in her chest. He won't win. He can't. Colt looked at her then, really looked at her, as if searching for something he feared losing. I won't let him hurt you, he said quietly. Either of you. She reached out, covering his hand with hers. You don't have to protect us alone. But Colt's jaw tightened. I've fought men like Baxter before, he said. I know how far they go. The memory of Margaret hung heavy in the room. Later that afternoon, the storm worsened. Annie rode into town with Samuel to gather supplies and perhaps find help. But the moment she stepped off the wagon, the eyes of Bitter Creek turned cold. Whispers followed her. Mail-order bride. Brought a child. Mallister's trouble now. Should have stayed east. Inside the general store, Constance Pratt stood like a judge behind the counter. "Mrs. Mallister," she said, voice dripping with sugar, "I heard about the fire. Such a shame." "Do you know anything about it?" Annie asked. Constance's brows lifted. "Me? Heavens, no! But Judd Baxter came through earlier. He seemed very pleased." Annie's blood ran cold. She left the store without another word. But stepping outside, a shadow blocked her path. Judd Baxter himself. Tall, polished, smiling like a snake. "Well now," he drawled, "if it isn't the new Mrs. Mallister, you're prettier than I expected, considering your circumstances." Annie stiffened. "Get out of my way." Baxter's smile sharpened. "Colt should have taken my offer. This valley belongs to me. Always has. And when he runs out of hay and money and hope, you and that boy of yours will need someone else to depend on." Annie's heart hammered in her chest. "We'll never depend on you." "Oh, I disagree." Baxter leaned close. "Women like you always depend on someone." Before he could touch her, Samuel stepped forward, rifle slung casually, but his voice deadly calm. "You best move along, Baxter." Baxter's eyes flashed with something dark, but he stepped back, lifting his hands slightly. No harm meant. Just a friendly chat. Annie saw the truth. He was watching her, studying her, waiting for her to break. Samuel guided her back to the wagon. "He's poking the bear," Samuel muttered, "trying to make Colt snap so they can lock him up again." "He won't snap," Annie said, "not if we stand with him." But doubt crept in like a cold draft. Baxter wasn't just cruel. He was calculating. And Annie had seen what men like that were capable of. The final blow came at dusk. Colt rushed into the house, breathless, eyes blazing. "They took the herd," he said, "drove half my cattle into the canyon, stole the rest." Samuel swore under his breath. "This ain't about land anymore. He wants to destroy you." Colt slammed his fist on the table. "And he's close." "What do we do?" Annie whispered. Colt looked at her, tired, angry, determined. "We fight back." That night, as if summoned by Colt's words, hoofbeats thundered up the valley. Baxter's men. 6 of them, torches burning like devil's crowns. Baxter himself rode in front. He stopped only 10 yards from the house and smirked. "Evening, Mallister?" he called. "Lovely night for a visit." Colt stepped forward. "Leave my land." Baxter held up a paper. "County notice. Taxes on this ranch are overdue. By tomorrow morning, the property belongs to the highest bidder." "You forged that," Colt growled. Baxter shrugged. "Prove it." Annie stepped beside Colt, chin high, fear pushed aside by fury. "You won't take this ranch," she said. "Oh?" Baxter laughed. "And who's going to stop me? You?" But before anyone could answer, a rifle cracked. A bullet split the air, knocking Baxter's hat clean off. Silence. Every head turned. Samuel stood on the porch, rifle still smoking. "I don't miss," Samuel said calmly. "Next shot goes between your eyes." Baxter's men tensed. Annie grabbed Tommy's arm and pulled him behind her. Colt stepped forward, gun drawn. "Last warning, Baxter." For a moment the night held its breath. Then Baxter smiled, cold, poisonous. "This isn't over." He turned his horse and rode off into the darkness, his men following like wolves retreating into the trees. Annie exhaled only when the night grew silent again. Colt holstered his gun and turned to her. Fear and gratitude warred in his gray eyes. "You shouldn't have stood in front of me," he murmured. "You shouldn't have stood alone," she answered. When Colt finally pulled her into his arms, it wasn't passion, it was relief, it was fear. It was two wounded souls clinging to the only thing left standing. Tomorrow, Baxter would return. Tomorrow, they would fight for everything: their home, their safety, their family. But tonight, Annie rested her forehead against Colt's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground. And she was ready.